It's gone 2 o'clock, so we'll make a start. I'd like to welcome you to this meeting. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind you all that the meeting will be recorded, and could I ask you to speak clearly into the microphone, please? Sederunt and Apologies. Lucy.
Good afternoon. I have 7 members present. Councillors Brodie and Crothers are not present, but they may be along later on.
I also note from the frontispiece that we're still carrying a vacancy, but I have been told that with that vacancy, which is for the Independent Conservative Unionist Group, will be filled come the new year. Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. It was really a point of clarification as to which Carruthers, Councillor Carruthers, is not present but may be coming later, or is that both of them? And also about the vacancy, I'm a firm believer that we should not be putting out papers when we're carrying vacancies without actually naming that there is a vacancy against a particular political group or grouping. I think that should be in the papers in the future. I notice it's happened at several committees, and if we are Scrutiny and Performance Committee, then it's important that that's noted.
I note from your sheet that you only have the one, Councillor Crothers. However, I think after the last meeting, just wonder if it's an old Sederunt, we do have both Councillor Crothers on the frontis. I think it was advised after the meeting, so we'll take it as an old sheet, and we'll I'll ask someone to make sure that in the future any vacancies that are held on committees are put in the frontis. Right. Item 2, declarations of interest. No hands up. Item 3, minute of meeting of 19th September. Can we take that as a correct record? I'm quite happy to say it's a correct record, if anyone. Are you happy to second that, Councillor Dykes, as you are noted as present? Right. That's that one. And minute the 17th October. Right. Move on to item 5. Up. Councillor Dykes.
Sorry, Chair. It was just really under the meeting in October where we were expecting some feedback from some of the questions that we asked at committee. I just was wondering what was happening with that, that was all.
We haven't had anything formal in writing yet from the witnesses, but we're certainly pursuing that.
Move on to item 5. Updating the scrutiny review identification process and scrutiny and performance handbook. This committee agreed our processes, particularly how we go about conducting scrutiny reviews, just over a year ago. This report gives us the opportunity to review how things have gone and agree some improvements, particularly to have a more streamlined process of identifying topics for scrutiny reviews. Liz is here to answer any questions of the report. Do members have any questions that they wish? Councillor Gilroy.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just looking at the appendix on page 35 with the current process and the proposed process. And I think something could be taken from the current process and put into the proposed process that's not there, which is that the 5 committee chairs and vice chairs with their responsibility for departmental business plans. And it is pointed out there that, you know, it is recognised that they have additional responsibility and accountability for their service areas. I think they should have the opportunity, and we would expect them to come to us if they would like something to be scrutinised. And I think it would be the right way forward for that. I think just to have it totally reliant on the scrutiny and performance, I think the chairs and vice chairs have a role to play in that, and I think it's an important one.
Possibly also all members, if they wish to bring something to the table, can bring it, but it would be up for the committee to decide if it's something that they feel should come through this committee or if it should actually go through its parent committee.
just to highlight, the discussion at the preparatory workshop had been looking to see where you were getting ideas and suggestions for scrutiny reviews, and I think it was the experience of last year where we did invite all members and all members of the management team to identify suggestions. You got 6 suggestions last year, and 3 of them weren't within your criteria. So I think the idea was that if we had perhaps some evidence sessions for you to look and perhaps get into some discussion about what reviews would be most helpful to the council, that might be a better process and get you more involved in that. But certainly very happy. We could indeed, if you'd want to leave it, that we invite all members, then obviously that's something that's up to yourselves. It's not mutually exclusive of having that more intense discussion with the committee themselves.
Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not so particularly concerned about all 47 members, but I do think that it's ultimately important that chairs and vice chairs in particular are given that opportunity, because they actually are accountable and have a responsibility for their service areas and their business plans. And I think that if, in my opinion, if they had a concern, then they should actually be informing the Scrutiny Committee of that, and then it would be up to this committee as to whether or not they felt it appropriate to take anything further from their suggestions. But I do think it's important. Now, I don't know, I think it might be 6 chairs and vice chairs now and not 5, but it is important that the chairs and vice chairs are given that opportunity, because they should be bringing things forward to this committee if they have concerns.
With that, is there anyone otherwise minded? Could be that incorporated. If we move to the recommendations, we've been asked to note the updates to the handbook to reflect the changed membership of the committee. Happy to note that. And agree and update scrutiny review identification process as amended. With the happy with that? Right. Move to item 6 now. Scrutiny review performance indicators for the council priorities and commitments, by Assistant Chief Exec. This report presents a summary of the information this committee has received and issues members identified during visits and evidence sessions against the review objectives. This is the first scrutiny review we have completed, and when you see the evidence presented together, I am sure you will agree there has been significant activity and a thorough look at different aspects of the issues. We now have a number of issues to consider in order to make improvements to full council in our performance reporting arrangements. Could I highlight this is a report that comes from us as a committee? These will be our recommendations for change. Liz Manson is here to answer any specific members' questions if required about the evidence and background. And perhaps we could take the 3 objectives one by one and discuss the issues to consider for recommendations that are set out in the appendix. While there are some questions outlined in the report, members may have other ideas and thoughts they would like to share about the improvements. Is there any questions from the members on the report itself before we go into the objectives? No hands? Right. If we move on now to objective 1, is about the performance information we get, and we have 5 issues to consider. If we go through those, the first issue that we have to consider is, do our performance reports provide sufficient information to effectively analyse progress on delivery of council priorities and commitments? Do members, Councillor Riper?
Thank you, Chair. I think it was June last year that we decided to scrutinise this particular subject, and it was me that put it forward, and I thought it was a fairly simple request. 18 months later, we're still working on it. I'm not being critical of anybody, but I thought it was just, I think a lot of the reports we get at committee don't show you the history of things so you can actually compare. They'll tell you, the indicator will tell you whether it's going up or down or whether it's steady or whatever. But you've no comparator quite often to look back and see, well, that is getting better or it's getting worse or how much worse it's getting or whatever. And I just simply thought we could look at putting history into the performance indicators, or more information if it's a financial subject to see whether we're spending more on something, whether we're spending less. And I don't know whether we've got any further forward than that, because the committee reports still appear to be coming in the same format. That's my point.
I think one of the things I've noticed, you get the short-term trends, but I don't know whether we've had Prevalent in place long enough to actually give us long-term trends. I know we've started using it more effectively over the last year, 2 years, and whether that's something that we can go back into and actually bring out the populated stuff from previous years so we can get a longer-term trend.
Perhaps I think what you're identifying in terms of developing recommendations is that you'd like to suggest that you have some more narrative, some history about a particular subject matter in the reports about the council priorities and commitments, and that you would like to see accompanying financial information when these performance reports come forward. So that would be 2 areas of recommendations that you might like to put to full council. Okay. Mm-hmm.
It's me telling you off to use your mics and I'm not. Councillor Dykes.
Thank you. I think if you look at the evidence that was taken from Audit Scotland on page 39, I think in this top part actually they're quite good at explaining what performance reporting you should be looking for. And it might be, I know there's a lot of new members on this committee, but it might be a good idea to maybe ask Audit Scotland or somebody else to come back and maybe just take the new members through what it is that would be of particular importance to scrutiny committees. I actually felt it was a very good session, but I completely understand that it is difficult when you only have short term and you don't see a long-term trend, because obviously you could be making a decision without having the full facts in front of you. I think it's important that we maybe look at that. We did take evidence sessions from a number of other councils. I have a particular bugbear about risk registers, and as a scrutiny committee we should be making sure that all our committees in the council actually understand that they have a responsibility for their risk registers, and in some instances I'm not sure that is the case. So education should have a risk register and it should go to the education committee. Overarching risk registers obviously go to audit and risk committee, but each individual service committee should understand what it is that's required of them. And I think from a scrutiny point of view, we maybe need to look at that.
Councillor Brodie.
Thanks, Chair. I think we've got to recognise that it's an ongoing process. We're at a very early stage in our performance indicators. You say we've not had time to measure things over the years. And I think when we visited East Lothian, that was one of the things they said, well, it's an ongoing process of scrutinising the performance indicators and see if they meet our needs. I know probably the area committee gets a good chance to scrutinise it, and what we're finding is that some of the targets aren't smart. The targets perhaps are very unambitious, and if we achieve them, then it's not going to be perhaps a great feat to achieve them. We have to constantly look at the performance indicators to make sure they're smart and that they meet our needs. So I think we've got to. This is something we've got to keep on top of on an ongoing basis.
That's something we could take back to full council, that we need to keep them updated through the planning process for the individual services. I still wonder if we have actually got embedded into the council proper scrutiny values, because if we take policy and resources at the last meeting, there was 2 performance reports came up. I think there was 3, possibly 4 questions asked. I asked 3 of them. There was someone else asked 1 question, but no one else seemed to feel at the service level or the strategic committee level that they wanted to ask a question. I think when it comes down to area committee, there's more of a, well, why is Wigton better than this Dale and Stewartry worse than A&E? And there's more of a comparison there, and to try and get more information out of it. I think people do ask extra questions, but currently at service committee, I think there is a lack of member questioning to see what they really want to get out of it. And I don't know whether that's something we should be looking at to bring in. If we take the risk registers that Councillor Dykes mentioned, they should be embedded in your service plan. And do members know where to go and find them? I don't know, do they consider them when it comes forward, or is it just a case of, well, there's the service plan and we'll carry forward? So whether it's something that as members we need to do, so maybe the invite to audit, come down and give us that presentation again, might be something that would benefit all members of the council. Richard?
Yeah, just following on from what you said, I think perhaps there should be a performance indicator on how committees are performing their scrutiny role. So perhaps we should have some ideas for performance indicators for that, and also who's scrutinising the scrutiny committee. Perhaps we should have a performance indicator on how well we are doing as a scrutiny committee.
I'm happy to mark all the committees if you wish. Lorna?
I think in terms of the risk registers, that's absolutely correct. An audit and risk made a recommendation that that information has to go back to committee, and I'm not clear at the moment that that's had any more scrutiny other than that information's been included in the reports. You mentioned, Chair, about the evaluation of how scrutiny's been conducted and who scrutinises the committees. I think perhaps as a suggestion it might be helpful if this committee made some recommendations around how the committees themselves evaluate themselves around that function, given that you're all members of all of those committees, in terms of championing that. But we could provide some sort of resource that committees could look at how they're conducting their business, and how well they're meeting those sorts of expectations that you're setting out here. In terms of the evaluation of the Scrutiny Committee agreed last year that it would look at its operation in springtime this year, notwithstanding the change in membership and function of the committee in the last couple of months. So there already is a commitment to do that, and it'll be for members of this committee to look to see how you wish to conduct that. And you did explore at the time whether someone would evaluate you or whether you would wish to self-evaluate or a bit of both. So certainly there's a commitment to do that from this committee already.
Have you got something that you can take back for that one? Yeah. I would say question 2, does the format of a performance report enable, that was dealt with as well, because there's, Councillor Gilroy?
It was just to follow up on the setting of targets, because actually sometimes when you get them, it's statistics, you can make them what you want really. So sometimes our targets, we don't set them very high. If you take just for example exclusions in schools, you'd hope to have no exclusions in schools. That should be the target. But that's not what's there. But why not? And who decides that that's not what the target is? So, you either just do it so that you look good or all right, or you do it for a proper reason that you want to hit a target, however impractical it is.
I can remember one of these being given as, it's a fact of, if you set a target of 0 exclusions, history would tell you you will never achieve that, so you will always fail. So the view is you put a realistic target in. Now, how realistic or how challenging that is up to members to decide, I think. And I think you have a point that it should be nil, but will you ever actually manage to achieve that?
On a follow-up to that, I do see that as a bit of a sort of ridiculous. No, it's not ridiculous. It would be an aspirational one. But, it's just who does set the targets, and do we as a scrutiny committee have the opportunity to say, actually, I don't think that target's set high enough for that particular service. Do we get to do that, or is that all done at service committee? Because I don't think the service committees do that.
Certainly, it's the role of the service committee and the the service committee to set the targets. But I think from what you're saying, there is perhaps something about the time that is spent by the committee explaining and what the targets are, why perhaps some of the issues that you're identifying, and indeed some of the issues I think that triggered the suggestion for this review, were about the targets that are set. And where this committee has a role is the objective 2 of this particular review is about target setting. So some of the issues you've picked up here, I think your recommendation to full council could perhaps be about the understanding or the explanations that the officers give about why some of the targets have been set, and about the time that the committee is spending in identifying or discussing why a particular target is. But again, that's the members of a committee's job to look at the targets and to ask and to scrutinise and to ask these very questions. So I think the specific targets that are in business plans would be for the service committee to discuss, but clearly this committee has a role in this review about, do we feel that across the board that the business plan targets are challenging enough, are they ambitious, and about one of your recommendations could be that committees are setting ambitious and challenging targets and perhaps setting some time aside to discuss that and explain to members why targets are what they've been recommended as.
My question was, do we have the opportunity to say to a committee, I don't think you're setting your targets high enough? Or is that not our job?
If you build in, if perhaps when we're having the evidence sessions and you want to do more work on performance targets, then you could build that in as a review, but it wouldn't be part of normal business, no.
Might be worthwhile us having the opportunity, because then if we don't have service-specific remits, we can actually challenge more that service, rather than if you're sitting on the committee, well, we don't want to have breads in our boxes, so therefore we'll keep the targets at a different level. So it might be worthwhile something to look at that. Colin?
Thank you, Chair. I just remembered that last year we did bring this up about targets, like Councillor Galloway says, but some of them being unrealistically low, but also I would personally like to have seen a history of the targets, so that if, for instance, children in P7 are only attaining 65% in maths, that somebody over the years sees that that target isn't being met and it conveniently drops to 60. I'm being very cynical, I know, but it's easier to drop a target to then meet it than to actually keep going with the height, or to raise the target. So it would be nice to know what the target was last year and where we were with that, so you can actually see the trend, not only of the actual figures, what we were trying to achieve. Yep.
Councillor Maitland?
I think we do sometimes get changes, don't we? If there had been a change, there's a piece of information at the back of the report, and I think that's very important, actually, what Colin is suggesting, that we do continue to get that information. It's made clear. Liz touched on it, Ivor, which was about that targets should have narrative, and there should be an explanation as to why this target is there, so that we can remember to say that not just that it's gone up or down, but why we're actually looking at it. And I think that's what happens. It gets detached from why we're actually measuring that particular thing, and it also might become irrelevant. We might decide it's not relevant. I would suggest that actually what members would like to know, and I have sympathy with Patsy's notion that we are not necessarily ambitious enough. Well, I think we should be looking to see what other councils do within the target level. Are we actually being less ambitious than one of our fellow or comparator councils? And if so, why? So I would like to see that, or to be sure that that's happened. I think we could look at that as as a committee. I've come in sort of halfway through this, as I think a number of us have. So so this is all really quite interesting. And as Jill suggested, that first section with the Audit Scotland witness section, bullet point 2. What is it about the priorities that's important for you to know? Concentrate on what you need to know. It's quite difficult to do that sometimes, really, to focus in on what it is. I wondered whether we should think about working ourselves, taking a service committee, those of us who are on a service committee, agreeing to work together on targets within that, and having an informal session with those of us who are on service committees to see whether we actually like those particular performance indicators, and then come back and report to this committee. I don't know whether that would be a sensible suggestion. It would mean that we'd focus a bit.
I think at the workshop that was suggested that we looked to actually form smaller groups so that we could concentrate on specific work remits. So that's maybe something we could take forward as well. But I think that would be up for us to determine.
There are two issues that have come up in this discussion. One is about the fact that what you're trying to balance is streamlined and easy to read and easy to understand performance reports. And when we looked at the examples from all other councils, the ones I think that members were most attracted by were the ones that were absolutely quite summary versions, quite neat and quite crisp. So you're trying to balance up that understanding of a nice straightforward report with all the information that you need to evaluate the performance. I think the second element is that the business planning guidance provides for an opportunity for a sort of workshop or a briefing session with members in advance of the business plan itself coming to the committee. And perhaps that's that kind of opportunity to have a more informal discussion about why some of the targets are being proposed and to get behind some of the proposals. That opportunity might be something that we would like to sort of recommend there's more made of that opportunity perhaps in the future.
Lorna wants to come in, then I'll bring Jill in.
I think in terms of looking at targets, I think it's entirely appropriate for the committee to look at targets. It's for the committees themselves and service committees to set the targets. I think the point about having small groups of this committee maybe focused on particular sets might be very helpful. And in terms of the information you've asked for in terms of looking at future business for this committee, one of the areas you wanted to look at early in the new year was the improvement service benchmarking suite. And what that'll give you is not only comparison in terms of target, but also in terms of performance within various groups, and groups of indicators, because I think looking at singleton indicators doesn't really help. It's looking at something more holistically. So perhaps that might be something we can do some broad briefings to the Scrutiny Committee around all of that information, but more in-depth briefings with lead officers on particular areas if you wanted to look at things in that way. But through your own efforts within service committees, I think that's a separate sort of piece of work, but we can certainly do that within the committee's preparation, and there might be something from that you wish to focus on. Councillor Gilroy's already mentioned sort of educational attainment and exclusions and those sorts of things, and that might be something you want to look at. But until you've seen that data, I think it's important to then determine whether the targets are, in your view, softer than you would hope them to be, or what's the other things at play. But also to have that debate with the lead officers about those targets and what they mean in the context of the service. And I suppose I have a question of members in relation to this debate, is we've talked a lot about the discussions at service committees, so we've got quite a detailed debate here, and we've had that over the period of time, 12 months that we've spent on this review. And you've had the opportunity to go and speak to other committees and other organisations about this. I suppose the question is, what changes in a service committee that prevents that level of debate on the targets? Is it time? Is it the conduct of the committee? Is it the range of the agenda? you know, and I suppose it's those things that might support other members. If we can look at any views or recommendations from that might support them conducting their own business in terms of service committee as well. It might be nothing, but I suppose it's a question from officers to you about what areas you might wish to strengthen or recommend or support as a scrutiny committee.
I think if you're looking at that, one of the things I find is if you're going through a report, current sort of consensus is you ask your questions, you get your answers, and that's you. And I think that's one of the things that if you've got a report which has 5 exception reports on it, and you're wanting to ask a question on each one, you ask them, and then you feel sort of, there is a feeling of, well, you've asked your questions, you can't come back in. And I think it's noticeable that there is a sort of, come on, let's get on with the business. So time might be one of the ones that we need to consider to see if we're actually getting enough time and giving enough time. Some of the reports come back and there's no exception reports. Things must be working quite well. You don't need as much time, but I think some of them are put on, and as they say, it comes the 12 o'clock or 12:30, must be about lunchtime, can we get rattled through these reports? And I think there is a bit of that as well. It's maybe being harsh on other members, but sometimes I think that does happen. So we've got Councillor Dyke, Councillor Maitland, Councillor White.
Chair, I mean, I would agree with some of what you're saying. I do think it's important because I don't actually think scrutiny is embedded in all council service committees, and councillors, in my opinion, don't fully understand that if they're a member of the service committee, part of their role is to scrutinise. And you're right, the business is carried out and the scrutiny reports come up and people think, well, we've done all our business, so, you know, it's not really up to us because we've got a scrutiny committee. And maybe Councillor Maitland suggested we maybe looked at select maybe a service committee and have a look at how they operate. And actually that might not be a bad thing, but I do think it's important that councillors on all committees understand that they actually have a duty to scrutinise when they're on the service committee. And I've seen myself being not too conscious about doing that in the past on some occasions as well, but it is really important that we do that. But I think it's seen as, well, there is a scrutiny committee, so that's their role, not ours. And I think we need to just maybe embed that a bit more in councillors' conscience and in the service committees.
I must admit there was one comment made to me at the last policy and resources. I expected more questions from you, Ivor. You are chair of scrutiny. Now, one man can't do everything. Councillor Maitland, then Councillor White.
I think that says it all, actually. Going back, somebody said, and I think they're absolutely right, that when information comes to area committees, that we get an opportunity to apply that information to what's happening in our wards. I think then the light goes on a bit. I really do. And I think that we might, as a scrutiny committee, suggest to council that they actually make more of attempting to make local scrutiny genuine and really appropriate and effective. I suspect, and I don't know what other people think, but there's been a bit of a gap between our original baseline assessments, you know, a statutory profile. I'm thinking of particularly the area profile. We had the statutory profile where you could see really good pieces of information, numbers of young people unemployed, all the important stuff that you had actually is then got out of date, got, you know, well beyond its sell-by date, and it's quite difficult to apply the outcomes which we want to that particular information. So I would like to suggest to council that a bit more emphasis is placed upon getting area profiles to be accurate and to be measuring what we do against areas, because it's at that point that I think that members wake up.
Councillor Viper.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify something. It's been said twice now that it's up to service committees to set the targets. Well, I don't know if I've been asleep at service committees or not, but I've never yet been involved in setting targets for, say, education or anything. I've questioned targets, but I've never been involved in the process of setting targets. So am I missing something?
I think the only one I can remember being questioned and possibly changed was MOT failures at first attempt or something like that. It was 95%. I think it was Councillor Nicholson challenged it at committee, and I think they did put it up to 100%. They should all be done on time and hopefully got through first time. But that's the only time I can remember sitting in a committee challenging one and having it changed. Liz?
The targets that are within the business plans when they're presented are for the committee's approval. So in approving the business plan, you are agreeing the targets that are within each indicator or each project that's within the business plan. I think Councillor Maitland mentioned that when you get the 6 monthly report and you get the update report, if a department, for a variety of reasons, wants to add any information or delete or indeed change information, including targets, they have to specify that as part of the report back to committee. So in that way, you're again, if they want to change a target, they have to be explicit about what they want to change, and there is a requirement they have to explain why they want to change it as well. So again, it's maybe just about developing that understanding that in approving a business plan, you're actually approving all of these individual targets, and that there is that opportunity to change them or to scrutinise them indeed.
Good to know for the future, thanks.
So looking at the questions that were being asked within Objective 1, I think we've covered most of 1, 2 and 4. Possibly a bit on 5 with the view that we should look at smaller groups focused on the performance of the council and delivering the council priorities. So we've maybe covered 5 as well. I think the only one that we haven't touched on possibly is how we report to the public and whether that enables them to actually take forward the information and be able to question it if they wish to question. Question 3, I think, on that. Are there any views on the public performance report that we put out? I take it will be broadcast, other than who gets their photo in the front cover. Councillor Gilroy.
I think the public don't get performance indicators. I think they understand the pie charts, and I think that's about as good as you're going to get, probably. What I wanted to actually come back on is because Councillor Maitland's absolutely right. You know, the lights do go on when something comes to your area committee and it's dealing with something in your area, your ward, or just in your actual area committee area. And we have made some recommendations from Stewart Area Committee, for argument's sake, to a service committee. I can't just remember what it was, but we've done 1 or 2. But we never kind of know whether they're taken up. What happens to them? There's no reporting back. You don't get to report back to say, this was brought up. Oh, well, I haven't seen it anyway. So it doesn't mean to say it hasn't happened. It means I haven't seen it, but I haven't picked it up. But, you know, because there is a thing here on page 45, are performance reports presented consistently across service and area committees? Well, I'm not sure if they are, because how do we know that? I don't know what happens in Wigton Area Committee. I haven't a clue what happens in Annandale, Nestdale or Nithsdale. So we don't know that. I assume they are. I'm assuming they are, but I have no idea if they are or not. But I'm also not quite sure that the feedback that comes from the area committees to the service committees, what happens to it?
Certainly the model is that should an area committee wish to perhaps have information about a certain aspect of a service, that the parent committee, the service committee would consider that, and if they agreed it, then yes, the area committee would then start getting performance information on that particular subject matter. I think there'd be a recent example perhaps of social work where the area committee said, we would like to start getting information on this particular issue. Social Work Services Committee agreed that yes, that was fine. They would prepare information broken down into the 4 areas. So the next time you get a Social Work Services report at Area Committee, it will include these indicators. So you should get that feedback the next time the Service Committee reports to the area committees. But I appreciate there might be a time lag. You know, you could be talking, I guess, several months perhaps between you making the request, going to the parent committee, and then it coming back. But it certainly will be dealt with by that particular department.
I know when I sat in PH&E, there was a report came forward, presented to the Service Committee of all the recommendations that came forward from the area committees. And I think at area committee earlier this month, PH&E fed back what they had proposed to do with each one on a separate appendix. And that came to our committee this month. It's maybe still to come. But it had a list of everything that was asked for and what action was taken. So it should come through the process eventually. Yeah. Now that was based on a year past June's plus a year past the 6-monthly report. So they are coming through, but it takes a while. Right. With that, have we got enough recommendations? Is there anything we want to say about public performance reporting? Just do as best you can. Councillor Maitland?
Just, and I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me now, but I do remember thinking that the current broadcast, I'm not absolutely sure that the public would switch on to what was these traffic lights. I looked at them and I thought, I don't think they'd understand what on earth was going on. I have to say, I had to look at it 3 or 4 times, and I'm still not totally sure that I understood it. So I think we might have to have a wee look at broadcast. I'm sure it was meant to be simplified, but I think it just didn't quite hit the buttons. If you're going to read broadcast, you know, for that sort of information, then you want proper information, I think. Actually, I think if you're that sort of person who is interested enough to pick it up and really try and drill down, then you want intelligent information.
Do you want to recap just to see the issues that we'll be highlighting to full council on this one?
Thanks, Chair. Just to remind members, you agreed an improvement plan for performance information in terms of public reporting, so there will be a review of broadcast in light of that review, and it'll come back to this committee in the first instance, so that'll come back through. The main points I'd summarised, and I'll just check in with members as I go through them, is that a strengthening of the history of information and comparator information for all the indicators and indeed the targets within the ongoing reports. And also some information perhaps in terms of setting targets, a history of when the information is being collected from and how the target is derived, even in brief terms, and that might be helpful in terms of the business plan. It's something we'll look at certainly for these business plans, so it's something we can already take action on in advance of your recommendations to full council. That risk registers should be included more explicitly within the suite of information within the business plan, and also in terms of reporting on performance within service committees and embedded as part of that kind of scrutiny. So I think that was a point that was made. Ongoing review and understanding of targets needs to be strengthened, and a clearer understanding of the ownership of the business plan and that information in terms of how that information is presented to members through the business plans and service committees. A commitment and follow through in the commitment and evaluation of the scrutiny committee that was already in place. Potential for providing service committees with an evaluation tool for them to look at how they are scrutinising both performance and other information as it comes through. Linked to previous points, better involvement of committees in setting targets, or at least being more clear, and take the point from members maybe not realising that that's been an ask and a recommendation within the business plans, and making sure that's as explicit as possible. Scrutiny committee will look at the targets across a range of services as part of its benchmarking investigations and determining its own future work, but a decision to take forward a focus on one or two or committees or service areas to look at how those targets have been derived and established in more detail, and perhaps setting that up within small groups of this committee and using the improvement service benchmarking data to do that. Invest more in the local scrutiny information and develop that further with clarity from members here, that being able to tie that back to your own area and your own ward interest and understanding has been much more helpful in terms of scrutiny area committee, and also clarity on the report back on any recommendations from area committee on that scrutiny to make sure that that loop's being closed and assurance around it. And also, I think the final point that was made was about embedding and supporting the scrutiny role of both committees and individual members, and looking at ways to continue to support that and improve that across all members and not just the committee itself. Was that? I think that was the main points I picked up.
Right. Now, I take that as objective one. Objective two, there's only one possible point, which was the first question: is the frequency of our council priorities and commitments performance report adequate? Because I think we've actually answered two, that we would welcome the use of scrutiny groups. Are people feeling that the 6 monthly reports that we get on priorities, etc., is adequate to give them enough information and to give them valuable enough information that they can see trends? Because you might have a movement of 1% or something in a month, but over 6 months it might be 6%, and that would be more concern. Are members happy with that? Right, and I think we've covered most of the points in the last one as well, within the discussion we've had. Right. So if we turn back to the recommendations, we've considered the evidence. Members happy to agree with that? Consider the analysis of the evidence. Considered that. Determine recommendations for improvement as paraphrased by Lorna there. We're happy with that. And note the requirement for the Scrutiny Performance Committee to submit a report with recommendations to the full council. And those recommendations that we agree at 2.3 will be the recommendations that form our report to full council. Right. Move on to item 7, Scrutiny Review Scope, Procurement and Commissioning Report by Assistant Chief. This report gives members the opportunity to enhance the objectives of the Scrutiny Review and Procurement and Commissioning, as there have been a number of developments since the original scope was agreed. Rona's McPherson's here. No, Rona Lewis. Go back. Yep. Is here to answer any member questions. Are there any questions on this report? Councillor Dykes.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a particular interest in this, as it was me who put forward the procurement and commissioning as one of the particular areas that we should look at as a council and the scrutiny committee. I feel that some of the evidence we've taken so far has been very important and quite enlightening as well as to some of the areas. I just wanted to ask a specific question, because obviously there's a procurement bill going through Parliament at the moment, Scottish Parliament at the moment, and following on from some of the evidence that we've taken, and in particular to do with supply chains and the, I suppose, the way that councils can keep work in their own areas from a major contract coming down through the supply chains. I just wondered if this council had actually put forward any recommendations or any sort of, well, I suppose recommendations to the bill, whether or not we've actually fed into the process in any shape or form, and if not, if we're still able to do that.
Thank you, Chair. The consultation process has now ended, and they're now taking evidence at the Parliamentary Committee, as I understand it. We fed in two ways. We fed in through the the procurement managers, the manager for Highland, one of the managers in that area. I think it was perhaps the lead for SOPO, the Society of Procurement Officers. We put forward our concerns about the bill, and we also did it through COSLA as well, so we fed in those two ways. There were some particular areas of concern for us, and I can highlight these briefly. The first one is the number of extra duties it's going to put on us as a council. I've not yet got a feel for how much extra work that's going to be, but certainly I don't particularly want to be in the position of coming back to members and asking for more staff, but I think there will need to be a report that highlights the risks and concerns of the bill, and it really is extra work that is going to put on officers in terms of reporting and carrying out the same process for lower level procurements that they do at the high level. And I don't think there's any hiding from that, and that's certainly been the main COSLA concern, and they have lobbied quite vigorously on that issue. The other concern is some of the points that are coming through that will be in that bill, but they come from the European directive, and the main concern of mine in that is the requirement that by 2015 all procurement will be done electronically. And I think you know that, I've spoken up about that before, that a lot of our businesses are just not geared up to deal with online tendering, and I doubt they will be by 2015. And whilst I appreciate there are some services that have a role to play there to get them there, and we talked about that with the Chamber of Commerce, I think that's still a real a target that's probably beyond, and it's going to leave a lot of people disenfranchised in taking part in public sector procurement in this area. The other point that you make very well is about the supply chain, and that we will now have a positive duty to take into account the economic impact and the well-being of our area in procurements. And I think it's still unclear, as we saw at the recent Scotland Excel joint committee meeting that Councillor Dykes attended, it's not clear how then we square buying things collaboratively through national contracts and also fulfilling that duty to make sure that we're actually taking care of our own area.
Can I just come back briefly on the supply chain? I mean, obviously, you're quite right with the new changes in the EU bill. Then it actually puts more onus on the council, both from a staff point of view, but also from some of the legislation that they're going to put in place that we're going to have to comply to. I have some issues surrounding supply chains at the moment, in particular in Dumfries and Galloway, and whether or not the council has any ability to try and assist in any shape or form. But we all know that there are some major contracts that have been awarded in our particular region over the last sort of 5 years, some of whom have been awarded by the government, others have been major contracts. For example, the new Stena port of Cairnryan, where major contracts have been awarded to companies who then put in place a subcontractor, and that subcontractor goes out into the marketplace and looks for contractors of all different types and levels. And there appears to be, dare I say it, there appears to be across a number of regions in Scotland, and I'm presuming elsewhere, where that middle contractor goes out of business, leaving none of the supply chain in Dumfries and Galloway being paid for the work they've carried out. Now, the main contractor has actually been paid the money by the government or the main body, and they have passed their funds to the middle subcontractor, and the subcontractor does not pay any further down the supply chain. Now, it seems to be happening over and over again. I know of 3 very recent cases in Dumfries and Galloway, some of which maybe haven't even come to light yet. But I know Ron and I have discussed this through what, as a council, if anything, we can do about supply chains and whether or not this scrutiny committee can look at the procurement side of things in any other way, whether or not there's any way that we can have in paper contracts a sort of clause in a white paper contract where the main contractor has a duty to all of the supply chain. I don't know, but we know that we have issues in Dumfries and Galloway, and whether or not we can scrutinise or do anything through the procurement side of things when we're looking and taking evidence as it is from this committee.
I think it would be absolutely worthwhile, to add that to the review if that's what members were minded to do. And certainly, I think we heard a little bit from the hub about this idea of almost like a contract bank account idea that where if a public organisation is paying the money, that is kept separate and it is then used for all elements in the supply chain. And I think that's something that has an attraction, and certainly happy to look at that and bring a report to this committee on what we can do. Whether we can influence, I think all we could do is possibly put pressure on the Scottish Government to use these more, but we could certainly make our feelings known.
Other follow-up?
Sorry, just very briefly. I mean, I would be pleased to see a report back to this committee. I mean, we did take a lot of evidence surrounding that, and I think it's important that we look at it. But I would like to know how that pot of money would then be dispersed, because I still, unless there's a link back to the main contractor, I still can't see how that pot could then be dispersed to subcontractors if there's a middle person in there. So I think it's important that we look at it and some evidence comes back in a report to the committee, in particular for the Dumfries and Galloway supply chain.
Richard?
Thanks, Chair. We had a good session with the business groups, the Hub and Scotland Excel, and now we're moving on to the new purpose and new way of, and new objectives. So what strikes me as good is that we're looking at how we get best value from in the capital programme, because there's evidence there that perhaps we should be monitoring our performance better there, and how we commission projects such as the schools and social work projects, which have been come to the attention of the committees lately. So I think that's a good thing that we look very closely at that, because it is important that we get best value from the capital, and also that how we can best work with the third sector as well. I think that's something that we need to look at as well.
The only thing I was approached by Unison, if they could have a union rep come and speak to us on their view on procurement and commissioning. I don't know whether the committee would be willing to hear evidence from them. It was a national manager or national person who wanted to come down and speak, to give a sort of view from the workforce as to what they have issues with regarding commissioning and procurement. Don't know if members are willing.
If we're taking evidence, then I think we might as well. I think that's a good idea, and then we.
And I suppose one of the other things with regard to the commissioning and the point Richard brought up about the local big spends that we have just now, I think it was raised at the Dumfries Learning Town meeting at Marchmount at the Dumfries High School with regard to what is considered a local spend, and there's some contracts can be up to about 85% you can actually say should come through a local spend. The contractor who had experience of this said, well, actually what you find is they find a local company to be a subcontractor and then contract all the work out with the region, but because it came through the subcontractor, they can use that as it was a local spend. And that's maybe something that, the supply chain sort of thing that we could look at as well, so that we can actually tie it, well, where we can tie it, that we should be looking to help our local economy. Any other points? No. Lorna?
Chair, just reflecting the comments from Councillor Dykes and Rona's response in the third bullet on page 49 in the first set of objectives, to consider how the council supports local private businesses in relation to procurement and commission, but also I think be explicit around supply chain and make recommendations for improvement, so that would allow us to explicitly include that within the document, if that's a particular area that you want to focus on as well.
Yes, I mean, I agree with that. In particular, you know, we are going to be making some big spends, and I understand that that has to be carried out in some cases by the hub, because that's what the Scottish Government have insisted upon if we are to receive our money from them. So it is important, and we did take evidence, and they said that wasn't part of their remit to look at supply chains in Dumfries and Galloway, and I think it's important as a council that we look at that. It is one of the council priorities, so we need to make sure that we address that.
Councillor Maitland.
This is a sort of slightly topical subject, I think, but will our review cover legalities of how we insist that certain people are paid? Will that be covered in this review?
Yeah. I think that, you know, I think that makes perfect sense. That is part of the supply chain, and that essentially that seems to be what goes wrong most of the time. Well, firstly, they don't always get the work, but secondly, when they do, they don't always get paid. So, I think if we can look at using every means within our power to try and make sure that we commit people through the contracts to paying those further down the supply chain, I'd be happy to look at that.
I'm maybe speaking out of turn, but it's maybe if we were putting conditions on a contract so that you actually had to implement something. Let's think top of my head, living wage is an option. Could we, is it legal to put that in a contract?
Topical, definitely, and in fact, only last Friday, when Councillor Maitland saw me, I was on my way to our external solicitors to talk about a large number of topics, that being one of them. And certainly, it's not, when you put out a procurement, you cannot put anywhere in the tender that a provider or a contractor must pay living wage. It is illegal, and it's in breach of all our European duties. We cannot do that. What I suppose we're wondering if it is possible is if it could be some precondition, or it could come in after, and I think the Scottish Government says as far as you can go at the moment is to say that you'd wish people to be encouraged to pay the living wage. So there's no change in the law that was reported, I think, to full council some time ago. You know, for certain contracts, I think people would like providers to move towards paying that, but there's certainly nothing that we can write in at the moment to a tender to say that anyone who is bidding must pay the living wage.
With that, if there's no further questions, move to the recommendations. Consider the proposed update, purpose, objectives, background information, evidence and timetable for the procurement and commissioning scrutiny review in the appendix. We're happy we've considered that, and agree the amendments as highlighted by Lorna. Yeah, and we'll have these. Move on to item 8, scrutiny review, training and staff development. This report presents the committee with the proposed next steps for the review of training and staff development. Again, there have been developments since the original scope and review were agreed. I think one of the main things is the Chief Executive Service is going through a review of training, and what they're looking for is, well, as we go through this process, the information that we have gathered could then be put forward to that new review rather than doing 2 reviews. We just roll them up to 1, and are members happy that that is the proposed way forward?
Agreed.
Is there any questions on the paper just in case? No. And item 9. Report allows members to consider the approach to be taken to develop the committee's future work programme. It proposes a series of evidence briefing sessions for this committee to identify future scrutiny review topics, as well as receiving reports from national bodies about our region's performance. Liz, to answer any questions. Is there any questions about this one? Councillor Gilroy?
It's just to do with the implementation of the local development plan. Do you propose to do that as we're going through that, or are you waiting till it's been agreed and then we look back? I mean, how do you propose doing that?
This was one of the original 4 scrutiny reviews that were identified, and I think at that time the local development plan would have been in place and being implemented by now. And the idea was that this committee would look at it at the end once implementation had taken place and then review its effectiveness. Clearly, time has moved on since this was originally agreed, and I think we would bring it back to you as part of the looking at your future work programme as part of the evidence sessions, and you can either reaffirm that you do want to build it into your programme or perhaps decide that it's no longer one of the issues that you would like to review. So we'll certainly make sure it doesn't get lost, but you might want to consider it when you're looking at your future reviews. I think at the preparatory workshop you had identified that policy direction, financial investment, best value were really the areas that this committee would be interested in, and perhaps picking out some of the parts of the council's priorities and commitments. So whether or not you would still want to look at the LDP, I think is something that you might want to, you can have another look at it and either, as I say, decide to keep it in, or you might decide that it's no longer one that you want to pursue.
Sorry, Chair, I think it's one that we should pursue, but I just don't think it's the time at the moment is all. I was quite surprised to see it there, you know, because I think actually you'd want to do it once it's been agreed and implemented, and then perhaps look back and see what you do next time round, which is a horrible thought, but will have to be done. So that was all I was interested in. Thank you.
Councillor Maitland.
Chairman, this is, given what we're stating in paragraph 4.1, this is a slightly difficult one, but I think it's incredibly important, and I don't know where it would sit, whether in fact it would sit with us. But the administration has got a new priority. It's got priority 7. And priority 7 at the moment is, as far as I'm concerned, a blank sheet. So it's quite difficult to scrutinise something which is non-existent at the moment. But I don't think we should actually lose sight of the fact that that's there. And given the enormous pressures that are going to be on this council in the next 2 or 3 years, the things that were in that bullet point, which was the possible development of a business bureau, it was particularly to do with policy development framework. Now, I think that's incredibly important that we have that, and involvement of members. Now, I would simply suggest to members that, you know, our job is to keep an eye on what's going on, and that must not be allowed just to slither away, because it's you know, it becomes the priority of just keeping one's focus on just keeping the business going, and you forget to actually look and see whether we are looking over the horizon as opposed to just in the immediate right in front of us. So I'm not quite certain how I would work that into a piece of work that we should do. I'm happy to listen to officers.
Again, when we're having the evidence sessions, we can make sure that that's a particular aspect that the committee looks at, if there's anything in that that you would want to pick out as a review topic.
No further questions. We've been asked to consider the proposals at paragraph 4.1 of the work programme. Happy with those? And adding about priority 7. Are we? Councillor Maitland?
I do see its economy and employment, and I fully, absolutely understand that that is definitely a priority for us. I don't think, given that health inequalities all seem to suggest that it stems around education, income and employment, I don't think we should lose sight of the education side of that. So, with your permission, Chairman, and for the reason that these are the three that the Health Board, our partners, always cite, income, employment, education, are the three drivers to avoid health inequalities. Could I possibly ask that we consider the impact of education on these things?
Members happy with that? All right. Are we happy to hold a series of briefing sessions to develop a full understanding of potential review topics with proposed reviews and scopes developed thereafter? All right. And 2.3, receive reports on national thematic issues, other areas and topical inspections relating to Dumfries and Galloway as part of the committee's work programme. Right. With that, I have no further business. This is the last one before Christmas. Can I wish you all a happy Christmas and a prosperous new year?
And to you, Chair.